The border post at Vesa Ring had not seen anything worth reporting in 3 years. A young officer named Voss leaned back in his chair, chewing on dried fruit, when a faint dot crawled across his screen. He almost ignored it. Small ships pass through this stretch of space all the time, usually poor traders without an escort. But this dot moved differently. Slow, steady, it made no attempt to hide. Voss pulled up the ship's registry. The markings came back human. A cargo vessel called the Horizon Ash, carrying grain, medicine, and a handful of colonists bound for a small outpost near the Empire's edge. He laughed and called his commanding officer, Relic, to the deck. Relic was a proud man who had spent 20 years rising through the ranks of the Dravith Empire. He had fought pirates, crushed small rebellions, and escorted trade convoys through dangerous systems. But he had never once respected humans. To him, they were a young species that had barely left their home world, flying in ships built from scrap and hope. He looked at the screen and smiled. "One ship," he said. "No escort, no shields worth mentioning. Let us give them a proper welcome to this part of space." He ordered 3 patrol ships to surround the Horizon Ash. On open comms, he mocked the humans without holding back, calling their presence among the stars an accident rather than an achievement. He told his crew this would be a good story to tell at the officers' hall that night. Aboard the Horizon Ash, Captain Daniel Hale listened to the insults without a change in his face. His crew waited for his reaction, some nervous, some angry. He raised a hand to calm them. "Hold formation," he said. "Log every word they say, don't answer back." His second officer, a sharp woman named Grace Winters, frowned. "They're circling us like we're prey." "Let them think that," Hale said. "Watch how they move, watch their gaps." While Relic's ships closed in, laughing over open comms about how easy this would be, Hale quietly studied their formation on his own screen. He noticed the wide space between the second and third patrol ship, a gap left open because the Dravith crew assumed no threat existed. He noticed how their weapons charged in a fixed pattern, the same sequence every time, never varied because they never needed to vary it before. Relic grew impatient with the silence from the human ship. He wanted a reaction, some plea or panic to broadcast back to his superiors as proof of his dominance. When none came, his mood soured. "Fire a warning volley," he ordered. "Let them feel what real strength looks like." The lead patrol ship released a burst of energy fire aimed just off the Horizon Ash's hull, close enough to rattle the ship without destroying it. It was meant to be a message, a small taste of what defiance would cost. The shields absorbed it and held. Relic's smile faded. He checked the readings twice, certain his sensors were wrong. Human shielding was supposed to be weak, outdated by decades compared to Imperial standards. Yet the numbers did not lie. The Horizon Ash had barely lost 10% of its shield strength from a hit that should have dropped a ship of its class much lower. On the bridge of the Horizon Ash, alarms chirped softly, nothing more. Winters looked at Hale, waiting for orders to retreat or return fire. "Hold position," Hale said again, his voice steady. "We're not here to fight them today." "They just attacked us," Winters said. "They tested us," Hale corrected. "And now we know something about their weapons we didn't know an hour ago." He began recording every detail the sensors could gather. Weapon charge times, shield frequency patterns from the ships surrounding them, the exact angle and timing of the attack. None of it would help him win a fight today, but all of it would matter later. Relic, confused by the lack of retreat or surrender, ordered his ships to hold their position as well, unsure what to make of a target that refused to run and refused to fight back. He requested guidance from his superiors, framing the encounter as a successful show of force, though privately uneasy about what had just happened. Word of the standoff spread quickly through the patrol network. Officers who had never taken humanity seriously found themselves talking about the strange behavior of the Horizon Ash. Some called it foolish bravery. Others called it something closer to patience, though few dared say that word out loud in front of Relic. As the tension held in silence, Hale sat back in his chair and allowed himself a small breath. He knew this was only the beginning. The Empire's confidence was built on centuries of unchallenged strength, and confidence like that rarely bent easily. But every proud giant had blind spots, and today, without firing a single shot, humanity had found one. Behind him, Winters finished logging the last of the data and looked at her captain with a question in her eyes. What happens now? Hale watched the patrol ships slowly begin to pull back, their commander clearly unsure of his next move. Now, Hale said quietly, we go home and get ready. Traveled fast in the Dravith Empire, but not always in the direction officers wanted. By the time Relic's ships returned to their home station, a heavily edited version of the encounter was already circulating among the fleet. In this version, the human ship had been frightened into stillness, too weak to even attempt a retreat. Relic did nothing to correct the story. It made him look strong, and strength was currency in the Empire. Far from the celebrations, a communications officer named Doran sat alone in a quiet office, reviewing the raw sensor logs nobody else had bothered to check closely. He was young, recently assigned to intelligence work, and unlike most of his colleagues, he actually read the numbers instead of skimming them for a headline. What he found troubled him. The human ship's shields had absorbed far more damage than official reports claimed. The weapon fire had been aimed to intimidate, not destroy, yet even a glancing hit should have dropped their shields lower than it did. He flagged the discrepancy in a report and sent it up the chain, expecting little to come of it. Meanwhile, aboard the Horizon Ash, Captain Hale transmitted his own detailed account back to Human Command, a much longer journey through relay stations and secure channels. He did not frame it as a victory or a defeat. He framed it as information. Fleet Admiral Louise Bennett read the report twice before calling a meeting. She was known for patience bordering on stubbornness, a trait that had frustrated many officers eager for bold action against the Empire's growing patrols near human space. They tested our shields, she said to the small group gathered around the table. Now we know their weapon charge cycle, their formation gaps, and how predictable their aggression really is. An engineer named Priya Anand, who had spent years studying alien technology recovered from old skirmishes, spoke up first. If their weapons fire in a fixed rhythm, we can time our shield rotations to absorb hits more efficiently. This isn't just data. This is a blueprint. Bennett nodded slowly. Then we don't retaliate, not yet, we adapt. The decision surprised several officers in the room who expected calls for immediate reinforcement of the border. Bennett explained her reasoning simply. A rushed response would confirm every assumption the Empire held about humanity being reactive and emotional. A quiet, calculated response would do something far more valuable. It would make them underestimate humanity even further, right up until the moment it stopped being useful to them. Over the following weeks, human engineers worked around the clock. Shield harmonics were adjusted based on the frequency patterns recorded during the encounter. Small, stealth-capable vessels already in early development were pushed toward completion, their designs quietly informed by the gaps Hale had noticed in the Dravith patrol formation. Back within the Empire, Doran's report gathered dust in a queue of unread files, buried beneath more exciting news of successful patrols elsewhere. Frustrated but not defeated, he began keeping his own private notes, convinced that something about the Horizon Ash incident deserved more attention than it was getting. Relic, riding the wave of his manufactured reputation, requested permission to return to the same sector and finish what he called an unresolved matter. His superiors, eager for another easy story to boost morale among the fleet, approved a larger patrol group under his command. He did not know that the ship he intended to humiliate a second time had spent the weeks since their last meeting studying him, just as closely as he had dismissed them. Aboard the Horizon Ash, Hale reviewed the incoming intelligence from Human Command, including updated shield configurations and word of 2 additional vessels being prepared for deployment to his position. He gathered his senior officers, including Winters, in the small briefing room. "They're coming back," he said. "Bigger this time if the reports are right." Winters crossed her arms. "Are we ready?" Hale allowed himself a small, tired smile. "We're about to find out." Outside the viewport, the stars remained still and silent, indifferent to the quiet shift taking place between 2 very different fleets. One side prepared for another easy display of dominance. The other prepared for something the Empire had not yet learned to expect from humanity: patience sharpened into strategy. Neither side spoke of it openly, but both understood the same simple truth. The next meeting between the Horizon Ash and Relic's forces would not be a repeat of the first. The officers' hall aboard Relic's flagship buzzed with excitement the night before departure. Junior crew members traded exaggerated versions of the first encounter, each retelling making the human ship sound weaker than the last. Relic allowed the stories to grow, enjoying the attention, though somewhere beneath his confidence sat a small, unspoken doubt he refused to examine too closely. His new task force was larger this time, 5 patrol ships instead of 3, chosen specifically to ensure there would be no confusion about who held power in this sector. He intended to disable the Horizon Ash, tow it back as a trophy, and use the footage to silence any lingering questions about his first report. Doran, the young intelligence officer who had flagged the shield discrepancy weeks earlier, requested to join the mission as an observer. His request was approved mostly because nobody thought it mattered who watched from the sidelines. The fleet arrived at the edge of the contested lane exactly where the Horizon Ash had been last seen. True to form, the human ship sat waiting, unmoved and unescorted, or so it appeared on their sensors. Relic opened a channel, his voice dripping with theater for the benefit of his crew. "Still here, little ship. I thought you might have learned to run by now." Captain Hale's voice came back calm, almost bored. "We don't run from conversations we haven't finished." Relic laughed and gave the order to advance. His 5 ships spread into their standard attack formation, weapons charging in the same fixed rhythm his crew had used for years without needing to change it. That rhythm was exactly what human engineers had been waiting for. 2 additional vessels, the Meridian and the Sable Creek, dropped their low-emission stealth profiles less than 100 kilometers from Relic's flank, close enough that his sensors barely had time to register them as more than sudden noise. Built using data gathered from the first encounter, their hulls were tuned to blend into the background radiation of the sector until the moment they chose to reveal themselves. Confusion rippled through Relic's bridge as new contacts appeared without warning. Before his crew could reorient targeting priorities, coordinated fire from all 3 human ships struck exactly where the shield harmonics of 2 Dravith escorts were weakest, a detail measured precisely from the first skirmish. The 2 targeted ships lost power to their weapon systems within seconds, disabled rather than destroyed, drifting harmlessly out of formation. It was not an accident. Hale had given clear orders before the engagement began: cripple, don't kill. A message of restraint would carry further than a message of slaughter. Relic's remaining 3 ships scrambled to adjust, but their attack pattern, so reliable in every previous encounter, now worked against them. The Horizon Ash's refitted shields absorbed the opening barrage with far less strain than before, exactly as Priya Annan's calculations had predicted weeks earlier back on human soil. On the bridge of Relic's flagship, alarms blared as tactical readouts turned from confident green to panicked red. Doran watched in stunned silence from his observer's seat, the private notes he had kept for weeks suddenly validated in the worst possible way. Relic gripped the edge of his console, refusing to believe what his own sensors were telling him. Increase power to forward shields. Target the smaller ships first. But the smaller ships had already repositioned. Using speed and coordination his own doctrine had never prepared him to counter. Within minutes, 2 more of his vessels reported critical system failures, forced to withdraw from the engagement entirely. Humiliated and outmaneuvered, Relic faced an impossible choice. Continue fighting with a crippled force against an enemy who clearly understood his tactics better than he did, or retreat and preserve what remained of his command. His pride wanted to fight. His training told him to retreat. Training 1. Full withdrawal, he ordered through clenched teeth, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. As his remaining ships pulled back in disarray, Hale's voice came over the open channel one final time, calm as ever. "Safe travels, Commander. Try not to underestimate us next time." Relic said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Aboard the Horizon Ash, Winters allowed herself a small, satisfied breath as the Dravith ships retreated into the dark. That went better than expected. Hale watched the fading contacts on his screen, feeling no triumph, only quiet resolve. "This was never about winning one fight," he said. "It was about proving we could." Behind him, the crew began the slow work of standing down from battle stations, unaware that the true consequences of this encounter had only just begun to unfold across the empire they had just embarrassed. A trade envoy named Celes had spent most of her life avoiding attention. Her people, the Ulan, had lived under Dravith oversight for 3 generations, quietly paying tribute and quietly obeying, never daring to imagine anything different. That changed the day a garbled transmission reached her modest trading post, describing 5 Imperial patrol ships forced into retreat by a small human fleet. At first, she dismissed it as rumor exaggerated through too many retellings. But when a second transmission arrived with matching details from an unrelated source, she began to wonder if something had genuinely shifted in the balance of power along the border. She was not alone in wondering. Within the Dravith Empire, damage control moved quickly. Official channels described Relic's retreat as a tactical withdrawal following unexpected resistance, technically true, though carefully worded to avoid the word defeat. Still, rumors spread faster than propaganda could contain them, especially among smaller species who had long resented imperial control but lacked the strength or courage to challenge it openly. Doran, having witnessed the battle firsthand, found himself reassigned to a research division tasked with analyzing human tactics in greater detail. It was meant as a quiet demotion, tucking away an inconvenient witness. Instead, it gave him direct access to every scrap of data collected on the Horizon Ash and its allied vessels. He began compiling a pattern few others had noticed. Humans did not react with panic under pressure. They absorbed early aggression, studied it, and countered it with unsettling precision days or weeks later. It was not brute strength that made them dangerous. It was patience paired with adaptation, a combination the Empire's rigid doctrine had never been designed to handle. His findings eventually crossed the desk of High Overseer Tavares, a senior commander respected for caution rather than showmanship, a rare trait among Dravith leadership. Unlike many of his peers, Tavares read the full report instead of skimming the summary. "You're suggesting their first response wasn't weakness," Tavares said during a private meeting with Doran. "You're suggesting it was strategy." "I'm suggesting we've been measuring the wrong things," Doran replied carefully. "We keep counting their ships and their weapons. We should be counting how quickly they learn." Tavares said nothing for a long moment, staring at the star charts spread across his desk. He had spent decades assuming humanity's slow expansion into the stars reflected limited ability rather than deliberate caution. The idea that it might be the opposite unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Meanwhile, on the human side of the border, Captain Hale received unexpected orders reassigning him to a small diplomatic task force. Fleet Admiral Bennett explained the reasoning during a brief transmission. "Word of the engagement has reached species we've never formally spoken with," she said. "Some of them are asking questions about who we are and what we want." Hale, more comfortable behind a tactical console than a negotiating table, accepted the assignment with quiet reluctance. His first meeting was arranged discreetly, away from Imperial monitoring, with representatives from the Yulan Concord, a loose coalition of smaller species seeking greater independence from Dravith oversight. Celes attended that meeting herself, curious to see if the stories matched the reality. She found Hale far less imposing than the rumors suggested, calm rather than boastful, careful rather than arrogant. He made no grand promises of liberation or conquest. He simply offered honesty about human capabilities and human limits, along with a willingness to build trust slowly rather than demand it immediately. "We're not here to replace one empire with another," Hale told the gathered representatives. "We're here because we think there's a better way to share the same stars." It was not a dramatic declaration, but it left an impression. For species accustomed to imperial promises followed by imperial control, quiet honesty felt almost radical. Word of the meeting reached Tavares within days, filtered through the Empire's remaining intelligence network among the border systems. Combined with Doran's research, it painted a picture that troubled him deeply. Humanity was not simply defending itself. It was quietly building relationships the Empire had never bothered to nurture, relying instead on fear to keep smaller species compliant. Tavares understood, perhaps before anyone else in the Empire's leadership, that this pattern would not stay contained to one border sector for long. He requested an audience with the Imperial Council, intending to recommend caution and diplomacy of their own. But pride, much like relics, ran deep within Dravith leadership. The council listened politely, then dismissed his concerns in favor of a bolder solution. If words could not restore the Empire's reputation, they decided, force certainly would. Tavares left the meeting with a heavy feeling in his chest, tasked with something he privately believed to be a mistake, assembling a full battle fleet to make an example of humanity once and for all. Shipyards across 3 Dravith systems worked without pause for nearly a month, assembling what the Imperial Council called a corrective fleet, though everyone involved understood its true purpose. This would not be a patrol or a warning. This would be overwhelming force, meant to erase the growing narrative of human capability before it spread any further among the Empire's uneasy subjects. Tavares, given command despite his private doubts, inspected the assembled fleet from the deck of his flagship. 40 vessels stretched across the dockyard, far more than anything sent against humanity before. He had argued for restraint and lost. Now duty required him to lead an operation he did not fully believe in. Doran, still assigned to research, submitted one final report before the fleet departed, warning that overwhelming numbers alone might not be enough against an enemy that had shown a consistent pattern of adaptation. His warning was filed, acknowledged, and ultimately ignored. The Council wanted a decisive victory, not another careful lesson in restraint. Word of the approaching fleet reached human command well before it arrived, thanks in part to quiet cooperation from Celes and other Yulan contacts, who had grown increasingly willing to share information gathered from nervous Imperial shipping routes. Fleet Admiral Bennett called an emergency meeting, this time including representatives from the Yulan Concord alongside human military leadership, a first in the short history of their new relationship. "They're sending everything," Bennett said, studying the projected fleet numbers. 40 ships, possibly more. Hale, present both as tactical advisor and diplomatic liaison, studied the star charts carefully. "They want a clean, undeniable victory, something they can broadcast to every species watching." "Can we stop 40 ships?" Celes asked, her voice tight with concern for her own people, who remained deeply vulnerable to Dravith retaliation regardless of the outcome. "Not through strength alone," Hale admitted. "But we don't need strength alone. We need them to keep making the same mistake." He proposed a plan built entirely around the Empire's greatest weakness, its unwavering confidence in overwhelming numbers. Human and Ulan forces would stage a series of deliberate, believable retreats, drawing the Dravith fleet through a narrow debris corridor near the border colony of Ashen Reach, a region littered with the wreckage of old mining operations and unstable asteroid fragments. Engineers worked quickly to seed the corridor with disabling ion mines, weapons designed to knock out enemy systems rather than destroy ships outright, continuing the same restrained approach that had defined every human engagement so far. When Tavares's fleet finally arrived near Ashen Reach, they found a modest defensive formation of human and Ulan ships positioned at the corridor's edge, seemingly caught off guard by the size of the approaching force. Exactly as Hale predicted, the sight of an overwhelming fleet triggered old assumptions among the Dravith command staff. Confidence bred carelessness. Tavares, despite his private reservations, found himself pressured by eager subordinates to press the advantage immediately rather than proceed with caution. "They're retreating into the debris field," one officer reported eagerly. "Should we pursue?" Tavares hesitated, remembering Doran's warnings about patterns and adaptation. But hesitation looked like weakness in front of a fleet eager for the redemption this mission was meant to provide. Against his better judgment, he gave the order to pursue. The moment the bulk of the Dravith fleet entered the narrow corridor, the trap sprang into motion. Ion mines detonated in carefully sequenced waves, disabling propulsion and weapons systems across dozens of ships almost simultaneously. Ships that avoided the mines found themselves boxed in by the debris field itself, unable to maneuver freely without risking collision with unstable wreckage. Panic spread quickly through the Dravith formation as ship after ship reported critical failures. The overwhelming force meant to crush humanity's growing confidence instead found itself paralyzed within minutes, undone not by superior firepower, but by the same predictable aggression that had failed Relic months earlier. Tavares, watching his flagship's own systems flicker under the strain of nearby detonations, understood immediately that continuing the assault would only mean further losses without any realistic path to victory. He faced the same impossible choice Relic had faced before him, magnified across an entire fleet instead of a handful of ships. "Signal a full stand down," Tavares ordered quietly, the weight of the decision heavy in his voice. "We surrender the engagement." Silence filled his bridge, broken only by the soft hum of failing systems around them. Outside the viewport, the corridor glittered with the drifting wreckage of an empire's ambition, undone by patience it had never learned to respect. A retired Dravith archivist named Corvan spent his final working years cataloging old military reports nobody else wanted to read. When the news of Tavares's surrender at Ashen Reach reached the archive, he set aside his usual work and began pulling every document related to humanity's border encounters, curious how a species so recently dismissed had managed to humble an empire that had never known meaningful defeat. He was not the only one asking questions. Across dozens of systems, the story of the corrective fleet's collapse spread far faster than any official explanation could contain it. Species who had spent generations quietly obeying Dravith authority suddenly found themselves openly discussing possibilities they had never dared voice aloud before. The Ulan conquered, emboldened by their role in the Ashen Reach engagement, formally declared independence within weeks of the battle's end. Celes, once a cautious trade envoy avoiding attention, found herself standing before a gathering of representatives from several smaller species, explaining what cooperation with humanity had actually looked like in practice: honesty, restraint, and a willingness to share strength rather than hoard it. Other species soon followed the Yulan's example, some cautiously, some boldly, each testing the empire's weakened resolve in their own way. Within the Imperial Council, the mood shifted from anger to uneasy calculation. Continuing military action against a growing coalition backed by humanity's unpredictable adaptability risked further embarrassment, or worse, further losses the Empire could not easily explain away. Reluctantly, the Council authorized formal negotiations, the first in generations conducted as equals rather than dictated terms. Tavares, stripped of his former authority following the defeat, was nonetheless invited to attend the negotiations as an advisor, his hard-earned understanding of human tactics proving too valuable to discard entirely. He accepted the role without complaint, quietly relieved that his earlier warnings had finally been taken seriously, even if it had taken a costly defeat to prove them right. Relic was not so fortunate. Quietly removed from active duty following renewed scrutiny of his original encounter, he spent his days largely forgotten, his name occasionally mentioned in military academies as a cautionary example rather than a celebrated officer. Recordings of his early mocking broadcast, once shared for entertainment, were studied instead as evidence of the dangers of underestimating an unfamiliar opponent. Doran, whose early warnings had gone unheeded for so long, found himself unexpectedly promoted to lead a newly formed research division, dedicated entirely to understanding human strategy and behavior, a role he approached with the same quiet diligence that had first uncovered the truth behind the Horizon Ash incident. Aboard a modest human vessel orbiting near the negotiation site, Captain Daniel Hale prepared for what would likely be his final formal role in the unfolding diplomatic process. Fleet Admiral Bennett had recommended him personally, trusting his calm, measured approach to guide the delicate early stages of a relationship that could easily collapse back into conflict without careful handling. When the day came, Hale stood before a mixed gathering of Dravith officials, Yulan representatives, and delegates from several newly independent species, delivering a short statement rather than a lengthy speech. "We never wanted this fight," he said simply. "We wanted respect, and we were willing to earn it the hard way if that was the only option offered to us. It shouldn't have taken a battle to get here, but we're glad to finally be at this table instead of facing each other across a battlefield." The statement carried no grand promises, no dramatic flourish, yet it left a lasting impression on everyone present, much like his earlier meeting with Celes had months before. In the weeks that followed, formal agreements began reshaping the balance of power along the border, establishing humanity not as a conquered footnote or a fleeting curiosity, but as a recognized security partner within a growing coalition of independent species. Far from the negotiation halls, the Horizon Ash resumed its quiet patrol along the same contested lane where the entire story had begun. Winters stood beside Hale on the bridge, watching the familiar stretch of stars that had once hosted mocking insults and warning shots. "Feels different now," she said. Hale nodded slowly, remembering the tense silence of that first encounter, the calculated patience that had followed, and the long chain of small decisions that led them here. "It is different," he agreed. "We didn't ask to be taken seriously. We made it impossible to ignore." Outside the viewport, the stars remained as silent and distant as ever, indifferent to empires that rose and fell, yet quietly witness to a lesson the Dravith Empire would not soon forget: that being underestimated is not always a weakness, and sometimes it is exactly the advantage a species needs most.